It's time to declare the best Spider-Man game of all time, and you're gonna help me do it. Hey, Chris Baker here with something I've been wanting to do for a long time with superhero games. A March Madness style bracket of related games fighting it out through fan votes until only one best game survives.
Spider Madness.
With Spider-Man PS4 hype in full effect, Spider-Man seemed like the perfect candidate for this. That and the fact that you guys watch my Spidey videos way more than anything else. I thought it'd be a challenge to find 64 unique games to fill out a full bracket, but we've actually got 82. And that's just games with Spider-Man in the title. So we're not going to include things like Ultimate Alliance, Marvel vs. Capcom, bigger universe stuff like that. It's also worth pointing out that I'm honoring unique games here. And sometimes that means making a distinction between two games you might associate as being the same release. As a simple example, one of the first matchups is the original Spider-Man movie game that came out for all consoles and PC, up against the original Spider-Man movie game that only came out on Game Boy Advance. They're both very distinct productions by different developers that deserve to be recognized as unique video games. And just wait till you see how many Spider-Man 2 games there are. NCAA March Madness is the world's greatest tournament if you ask me, and it serves as the model for this whole thing. Just like March Madness, Spider Madness will have 32 opening round matchups. Given that we have 81 games to work with, the math doesn't work out so well there, so at least for the first round you'll be seeing a few 3 and 4 game matchups. From the second round forward though, it'll always be one-on-one, minus Dr. J and Larry Bird. There may be a better way to do this, but I'll be using my own Twitter account, @cbake76, to conduct the polls. And the plan is to launch a new poll alongside the tip-offs of each March Madness game. I think I'll be able to keep this up for the most part in round 1, but I'm headed to GDC 2, so I'll have to call a few audibles after that. Sorry for the football metaphor there. Anyway, all that said, I know you want to see the matchups. There you go. Let's start things off with the retro bracket. It's 82 versus 92 with Spider-Man's first ever video game up against an NES game from LJN. Enough said. Our first three-way battle features the first 3 PC games for Spidey, with Quest Probe, The Amazing Spider-Man, and The Amazing Spider-Man and Captain America in Dr. Doom's Revenge, the longest title of all time. Jumping to the 90s, we have Spidey's original Genesis game, and his last game from Sega, The Amazing Spider-Man Web of Fire for 32X, which is worth a lot of money. In a battle of beat-em-ups that adapt actual comic stories, it's Maximum Carnage versus Separation Anxiety. These two games came out at the same time and have the same cover, but their content is different. It's the battle of the Genesis and Super Nintendo games called Spider-Man. Next up are a couple of adventure games only released in Italy that none of us have actually played. And here's one more of those up against a Japanese game you may have played on an emulator. And our final retro matchup pits Spider-Man's arcade game against Spider-Man's team-up with the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge. Switching gears to the handheld bracket, our first matchup is a 4-way battle between Spider-Man for Game Gear, Spider-Man for Game Boy Color, The Amazing Spider-Man for Game Boy, and every Spider-Man Tiger handheld in existence. Only one is pictured. Simplifying things a bit, it's Spider-Man 3 Invasion of the Spider Slayers versus Spider-Man Mysterio's Menace. Do you prefer your handheld Spider-Man 2 that has nothing to do with movies on the Game Boy or the Game Boy Color? I did a video once on how much I love these two games. I'm curious to see which of the Metroidvania games you guys feel is better. And here we have 3 different versions of a game that is probably not what you're referring to when you say how much you love the Ultimate Spider-Man game. Meanwhile, a different game set in the Ultimate Universe, that being Battle for New York, goes up against the Nintendo DS versions of Edge of Time and Friend or Foe. Admitted, of these 3 Game Lock games, you've only ever heard of Spider-Man Unlimited. And closing up the handheld bracket, it's 3 games I just found out existed. Okay, on to the modern bracket. Now we're talking. First matchup is The Amazing Spider-Man vs. Kingpin for Sega CD versus Spider-Man The Sinister Six on PC. They're both pretty old and from the 90s, but hey, they both talk. They're kinda modern like that. Moving up to this millennium, it's the first two Activision Spider-Man PlayStation games. Check out my video about the first one. You'll like it. Here's an interesting three-way matchup between Ultimate Spider-Man, Disney Infinity 2.0, the Ultimate Spider-Man Pack, and Spider-Man Friend or Foe. Not quite as interesting is this matchup between the Spider-Man Game Pack for the Mattel Hyperscan and this phallic-looking joystick representing the entirety of Jakks Pacific's line of plug-and-play TV games. The primary version of Spider-Man Web of Shadows goes up against the Amazing Allies Edition, which only came out on PS2 and PSP. I'm predicting a landslide here, but believe it or not, Greg Miller in his IGN days gave a much better review to the Amazing Allies Edition. Shameless name drop in the hopes that Kinda Funny helps promote Spider Madness. And in the battle of the Beanox comic book games, it's Shattered Dimensions versus Edge of Time. I'm kind of dying to know if anyone in my audience played any of these edutainment titles growing up, and if they learned anything. I gotta say, that case of the Sinister Speller looks pretty rad.
I want to know who's behind these misspelled words!
And finally, a pretty weird matchup pitting all of the collected Flash games on MarvelHQ.com against Marvel Pinball, the Amazing Spider-Man table. Incidentally, one of the best ever Spider-Man pinball players, Dan Slott. I'm not kidding. And finally, the cinematic bracket is all about the movie games. First up, a couple of free games, and an arcade game you can basically play for free on your phone. You're probably familiar with the VR experience for Homecoming, but the Dave & Buster's game is basically a Spider-Man Unlimited level with a Homecoming skin. Just like the Kellogg's giveaway added a Tobey Maguire suit to Neversoft's game. Which brings us to the first full-fledged movie game, Spider-Man for consoles and PC versus Spider-Man for Game Boy Advance. Then of course came Spider-Man 2 for Xbox, PS2, and GameCube. It's up against the PC Mac version, which is quite different. Of course, Spider-Man 2 also had unique games on Nintendo DS and PSP, and we're still not done with Spider-Man 2 games. There's an N-Gage version, that silly web action video game system you may have seen in my commercials video, and something called The Hero Returns, which was on cell phones in 2005. Luckily, almost every Activision Spider-Man 3 game was pretty much the same thing, except for the Nintendo DS version, and then there were a couple of mobile games as well. I'm sure that puzzle game was amazing. For the Amazing Spider-Man, the Nintendo DS version goes up against every other Amazing Spider-Man by Activision, plus Gameloft's iOS Android version, and even a flip phone version in 2012, whoever was playing that. 2 years after that, there's still a market for Java flip phone games, as well as iOS, and of course the Amazing Spider-Man 2 on PS4, Xbox One, X360, PS3, and Wii U, and the 3DS version. Once again, the voting starts with the tip-off of the first March Madness game on Thursday, March 15th. And I'll be keeping pace as best I can, probably with a few snags in there, until the final game on Monday, April 2nd. I hope to do at least one video about how voting has gone during the middle of all this, at least before the Final Four. We'll just have to see what my schedule allows. I may even see if I can get a few special guests to chime in with their thoughts along the way. But at the end of the day, this is all about people who like to play Spider-Man video games, people like you and me, people who care enough to watch a video like this. And I could really use your help. Retweet your vote. Tell us why you voted what you did. Get some discussion going. Do it in the comments, do it on Reddit, do it anywhere that you talk about video games. The more people who participate, the cooler this whole thing's gonna be. One thing I'd love to hear from you guys right now, what do you want to win? And what do you think will win? Are they the same thing? Also, did I miss anything? I'm pretty sure this is the most definitive list of Spider-Man games ever put together, but it's entirely possible I missed something, and if I did, there might still be time to get it into the tournament. So speak up, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter and subscribe on YouTube so that you're up to date on every single vote that's happening. Finally, as for actual March Madness, go Vols. Bye everybody.